For anybody who's listening to this who struggles with emotional eating or who struggles with their weight, who may be obese or facing another pandemic in our society is type 2 diabetes and people who are pre-diabetic. So these are major health issues and they're related to addiction. So if you're seeking recovery and seeking greater health, it may be that you need a food reset. And it may be for a little while. You may need to be in a structured approach, which ultimately could lead to a greater sense of freedom, health, wellness, and not to always be in that same place you need to be, perhaps, at the beginning of your journey. Welcome, everybody, to In the Circle. I am your host, Tommy Rosen, and I am delighted to connect with you today and to explore with you some of these puzzle pieces of the human condition. We see things through the lens of earnestness and the seeking of truth. I like to say this is a community of people that are seeking and also finding. We do want to be seekers. We want to always be students. We want to always be open to new information. We also want to be able to find the nuggets of truth along the way, along our path of discovery, as we refer to Recovery 2.0 as the path of discovery. So I'm delighted to be in circle today with each of you. And I'd like to ask which of you brave souls would like to begin today and ask a question here in the circle that we can work with. Okay, Ruth's hand went up first. Bless you. All right, Ruth, let's begin with you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So good to be here.
Delighted to be here with you.
Thank you. So my question today goes back a long time. I've been in recovery for 25 years, and I started my journey as an overeater, an emotional eater. And I've come a long way in that journey. And I also discovered codependency about 7 years ago. So I study those intently. And about 10 years ago, I did a lot of step work in my 25 years. And about 10 years ago, I discovered that for myself, through a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error, that extreme restriction of food was not the answer for me. Even though I was surrounded by people who were using a lot of, I'll call it thou shalt nots, things we wouldn't eat ever. And there was, for me, this continuous cycle of restricting and then not restricting. And it was pretty brutal. So I started experimenting, and I found that for me, full permission was the answer. Eat a little bit of everything and put no restrictions on anything. And that's been just a really peaceful place for me. It's been really nice over the past 10 years, continuing to experiment, continuing to notice and use my step work to monitor, just to be in touch with myself. I'm not perfect at it, but I'm working on it. So here is what I'm wondering about. I hear a lot of people in recovery, a lot of people in the rooms talk about their counting of days, their thou shalt nots, the things that they don't eat. And I get that. I did it for a long time, and I respect it because I think that long time when I did that was useful. But I have another view, and I often talk about it. And I like to talk about it honestly and openly. So I wrote down my question. I'm just going to read it to you because I want to be sure that I can make myself clear. My question is, Am I doing a disservice to those who are perhaps in early recovery, perhaps in long-term recovery? But am I doing a disservice when I talk about the food substances that I have learned to eat in moderation?
Thank you. What an epic and important inquiry. And oh my goodness, you have opened up the possibility to talk about some of the most important aspects of recovery, in my opinion. So thank you, Ruth, so much for this inquiry. I'm gonna put you on mute for a moment. Oh, you did already. Okay. I'm going to speak a little bit on this inquiry and this topic. What comes up for me, the initial thing I want to say is different people need different things at different times. We'll start there. The direct and quick answer to your inquiry, am I doing people a disservice by sharing what my experience has been? The answer would be no. We never do a disservice by sharing our truth and our experience with someone, as long as there's one caveat to that statement. We have to understand who's in front of us. And just the same way we wouldn't say anything to a child of a certain age, we wouldn't just say anything, even if it was the truth. There's certain things that you would need to temper in your communication to others. So for example, if you encountered somebody who was in their first week of recovery, of food recovery, and they said to you, I'm really following this very strict regimen right now. Well, it very well may be precisely what that person needs at that moment in their recovery journey. And it would be inappropriate for you to say, oh, that's not right. That's not what I've discovered, that the way to be is like this. I can have whatever I need at whatever point. I'm allowing myself this freedom, if you will. At that point in that person's journey, they might actually need a very rigid and well-defined structure to be able to access later on the freedom that you have so beautifully been able to access and attain in your life in long-term recovery. Now you've been at it for a little while, and bless you on your multiple decades of recovery and all the journeys you've been through and all the different things you've been able to experiment with in that time. And I don't mean it as an insult to the person who's new at recovery by the analogy is speaking to a child. I don't mean that as a put down. What I mean is somebody who's less experienced than we are. We want to be mindful and careful how we communicate with people. We do want to tell them the truth. So the truth for you might be, at the beginning of my recovery, as I look back on my own recovery, I might say, at the beginning of my recovery, I needed certain things, certain routines, and certain regimen that I didn't need at every stage of my recovery. Now at 32 years, my recovery approach, the things that I need to do, the way that I pay attention to my life, the way that I stay on what I refer to as the path of discovery, is the way it is today, very different from what I needed in the beginning of my recovery, when maybe I was going to 10 meetings a week. Nothing wrong with that. But my effort in the world doesn't have me going to 10 meetings a week right now. Recovery, though, has sort of sunk, it's in my DNA. The idea of being awake and working on being more awake and working on all the things in my relationships with food, in my relationships with people, in my relationship with the planet Earth, my relationship with this body, my relationship with this mind, working on all of those things today just as ever. But I find that I need different things now than I used to need. So things have changed for me. in my communication with newcomers who come into, say, a 12-step program, or they're saying, I'd like to work with you, Tommy. And I would say to that person, okay, wonderful. What are you going through? And they're like, well, I'm 2 weeks off of opiates. I'm also 2 weeks off of alcohol. And I would ask them how long were they on those substances as an example. Well, for that person who's 2 weeks off of opiates, 2 weeks off of alcohol, that's going to inform what I might suggest would be helpful for them at that point in time. Whereas if somebody came to me and said, I'm 2 years sober, I've reached a point in my recovery where I'm a little confused about what I'm doing in life, and I really need something to sort of boost my confidence and my esteem, and very different conversation with with different people depending on what they're dealing with. So that's the very first thing I want to say, is we need to know who's in front of us. Your truth today, or my truth today, at however long we're sober, is simply our truth today. And in the sharing of that truth, we'll be mindful of who's in front of us. The deepest thing that I could say to a newcomer is, when I was new, these are the things I did. And that changed over time. And that's helpful for that person to know. You know why? Because nobody wants the program, the spiritual program, that doesn't evolve. If someone said to me at the beginning, well, you'll be going to a meeting every day for the rest of your life. You'll be doing exactly the same things. You'll be thinking exactly the same things, and you'll always be, threatened by the disease of addiction. I'd say, no, thank you. I'm not interested in that particular approach. Recovery is evolutionary, or it's not recovery. Period. Either we are changing, therefore we require different things at different times, or we're not actually engaged in a true path of recovery. And I would say the same thing for any path of spirituality or anything you actually want to learn in life. Imagine sitting down to play the piano. You're 7 days into learning the piano. If your teacher said, you're always going to struggle this way. You're always going to struggle this way, the way you are right now. And your fingers, you're going to have to think about everything. It's going to be super slow and kind of messy. And you're always going to be struggling. Of course, we all know that's not the case. We get better. And so this brings up this concept, that very, very important concept in recovery. We heal. We change. We evolve. And isn't that wonderful? Okay. Next thing. You brought up two topics. Two of the biggest topics that human beings work with in life. Food, right? So we'll just start there. Food. Could anything be more primal, more core to our experience of life than food? I don't think people realize the connection between the food we eat and the way we think. The connection between the food we eat and the way we feel. The connection between the food we eat and the way we act and show up in the world. For sure, the fact that we are so in our core affected by our food choices should make it one of the most important topics for anybody on a path of recovery from any addiction, because it's directly connected to our emotional state. And of course, the core addictions are going to include our relationship with food. This is a place where we can get out of balance. And almost everybody is on this spectrum somewhere. Caffeine, sugar. Essentially, are we eating to energize ourselves, or are we eating to stimulate or sedate ourselves? Are we eating out of an emotional experience, fear or anxiety, depression? Or are we eating because we need fuel for this body and for this mind so that we can create from this heart and be free? the freedom that you spoke of is very interesting to me. You are truly one of the very few people in recovery from food issues that has expressed so clearly and so beautifully the freedom that I actually would advocate for anybody. People may need, as we said at the beginning, people may need a container. And they step into that structure and it's very, very helpful. And maybe it's very rigid. Eventually, though, we want to be free. We don't want to always have to weigh our food for the rest of our life. That would indicate that we were still stuck in a frequency of addiction that required that. Now, if that's where somebody is, okay, I have understanding and I have compassion for that. And if that's their decision and that's how they feel they need to be in this life, that's perfectly fine for them. If they were to ask me about it and it was a problem for them and they said, I'd like to live a little bit beyond the rigid constraints of how I'm currently living, I would say, okay, let's take a look at that. What could we do to break out of the box, as it were? What could we do to break out of that box? How could we experience a deeper level of freedom? Well, you expressed it. Ultimately, I enjoy food. Food is part of the joy of existence. I certainly know what it is to be out of control with food. I know what it is to eat emotionally, and I know what it is to be addicted to sugar and caffeine and all of those things. I've had these experiences in my life, and I've had those experiences in recovery as well. And yet, that hasn't pulled me away from my center. It hasn't pulled me away from my joy, away from my awareness, away from my presence. And I suppose that if it did, that's something that I would really need to take a look at. But over time, you have managed, one day at a time, to explore your reaction to food and to try different things which you would later find didn't work for you, and then to try other things that worked for you. And because the things that you found to work for you are not necessarily what the rest of society is saying the thing you have to do, doesn't make it wrong. For you, it makes it very, very right. And I commend you in your strength to base your decisions on your own life experience and not to be pulled back into a rigid way of thinking by other people who haven't had that experience. That's a very powerful thing. Nobody can tell anybody else what to eat. Nobody. There's no diet that is the diet for everybody. Diet depends upon your family history. It depends upon your genealogy. It depends upon your geographical location in the world. It depends upon what's available to you as food. There's so many powerful stories for us around food. And this is one of the most important things for us to look at as people in recovery from addiction. So I'll give you an example right here. I've told the story before about visiting my grandmother when I was a young boy. And she used to make the most incredible spaghetti with the most incredible spaghetti sauce that anyone has ever made in the history of spaghetti and spaghetti sauce. I referred to my grandmother as Nanny. So I said, Nanny, make your spaghetti for me. Now, when I went to go see my grandmother, it was an experience of pure, unconditional love. I could do no wrong in front of this woman. I mean, the way that she loved me and pinched me and grabbed at me and all of them, my aunts and my grandfather, and they just showed me so much love. And so that feeling of unconditional love was connected to my experience of spaghetti and spaghetti sauce from Nanny. And I tell you, like clockwork, if I get stressed, frustrated, angry, lose my center in the world today, even a little bit, I wonder why it is that I start thinking about making a bowl of pasta for myself. Interesting. And these stories run so deep, each of us on our food journey. This is going to help us to find ultimately our realization and our liberation, and to understand motivations behind our food choices and why we might be a little out of control with certain things. And also to ease up on ourselves a little bit and say, oh, when I'm missing the sweetness of life, I might make some spaghetti because it reminds me of the feeling of unconditional love that I used to get from my grandmother. How powerful is that story to help us understand what we're doing when we approach food? So it's incredible to me that, and so wonderful to me that you have taken a look at your behavior. You've become a scientist. I tell people in our food reset program, we do a food reset every year, and it's coming up here. We do it in October every year, and the food reset is really an opportunity for people to take a look at their relationship with food and to become a scientist. To become a scientist of their own food experience, because there's no one that can tell you what to eat except you, or how to eat, and you have found the way to do it. The second thing that you mentioned here was codependency. You said I've been studying codependency, and I've been studying food addiction and recovery for all these years. So codependency having to do with relationships, and the relationship with food is no different. So in a way, one can have a codependent relationship with food. I know we don't think of it that way, but of course we can. We can become dependent upon food in an inappropriate way for us in that relationship. And one thing that's interesting about codependency, meaning relationships and the way we relate to each other, to ourselves, to food, to the planet, to the Great Spirit, God, higher power, whatever your concept of that is, and food, these are process addictions. What I mean by that is we're always going to be in process with these things. We can give up drugs and alcohol. Of course, they're not required. They're not elemental. They're not, we don't need them for our survival. But food and our social being, the social aspect of life, sex, connection, family, friendships, colleagues, all of these relationships are core to our existence. And so we're always going to be working with them. The reason I bring this up is because those people who do struggle with drugs and alcohol, when they put those substances down, guess what presents itself to these people? Food, sex, relationships, codependency. And so while you may not have struggled with substances in that way, I can assure you that if you had, you would have had to release those substances first before you could get to this deeper work that we're talking about now, which is the food piece and being in a healthy relationship with that. And of course, the codependency piece, looking at all of our relationships as sacred and working to move towards greater balance and greater harmony in all of them. So congratulations on your amazing becoming and your amazing recovery. And, I just want to say the freedom that you speak of is beautiful and inspiring. And for anybody who's listening to this who struggles with emotional eating, or who struggles with their weight, or who may be obese or facing another pandemic in our society is type 2 diabetes and people who are pre-diabetic. So these are our major health issues, and they're related to addiction. So if you're seeking recovery and seeking greater health, it may be that you need a food reset. And it may be for a little while. You may need to be in a structured approach which ultimately could lead to a greater sense of freedom, health, wellness, and not to always be in that same place you need to be, perhaps, at the beginning of your journey. So I hope that you're inspired by Ruth's inquiry. And I hope that you're inspired by this exploration of that inquiry, because it's the great dilemma. It's the great problem for anybody who's new at anything. We think when we come into recovery, especially from any form of addiction, it's painful. We want to change. We don't know if we can do it. And we believe that we're going to be thinking the same way we're thinking now 6 months from now. And that is the great dilemma of every newcomer. Because you can't see yourself 6 months from now. You won't be the same. You won't be thinking the same, experiencing the same things. You literally won't be the same person if you are earnestly working a path of recovery. So Ruth has shown us through her 25 plus years that evolution is taking place, that freedom is possible, that one can return to a healthy relationship, an enjoyable relationship with food. And what a great example of recovery. So thank you so much, Ruth. And I want to ask you what comes up for you as you've heard me explore this inquiry.
Well, thank you so much for your insight, Tommy. What comes up for me is the freedom, not only the freedom that I found with my food and my body. That's the really biggie, is just learning to be in my body wherever it is today. But also the freedom in this community. It reminds me of why I'm part of this community, because I do have a lot of freedom. Early in my discovery about what really works for me 10 years ago, I didn't have the courage to go into a meeting and say, I eat a little bit of everything, because I was afraid I'd get kicked out, like really. And there are those meetings that just don't tolerate that. Fortunately, I was never part of one, and I did eventually find the courage to do that. And as I was formulating my questions, I really wondered if I'm afraid to say this because of my codependency. You know, I want to help people and I want to have everybody like me. And so I just really appreciate your answers, really spot on for me in terms of being truly honest about what I do and what I don't do, and knowing that it can help other people, and the reminder that I need to be aware of, I need to temper, especially when I don't even know who my audience is. I need to be able to say, well, this is what works for me after many years. So thank you for that.
Yes. Well, you're so welcome. And I just want to tell you a quick story. Your comment there brought up a few things for me. One thing is that often I'm asked to speak in traditional or what's known as closed 12-step meetings. So that could be Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or other fellowships. And so I'll go and speak there. And it'll begin with when I introduce myself, I say, my name's Tommy and I'm a person on a path of discovery. Now most people in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings or Narcotics Anonymous meetings are not used to that language. And so I can see out in the audience, my eyes, people's eyes are just, oh God, here we go. Here's one of them, this arrogant person who's coming into our rooms to tell how different he is than everybody else. And nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be. I don't consider myself different than any of them. I consider myself exactly perfectly situated to be in that room, in that circle. I will then say, I recovered from alcoholism. I recovered from drug addiction. And then I see half of the eyes will roll in the room. Oh God, okay, we're going to hear about how recovered this guy is, And I point people's attention. I say, listen, I say that I'm recovered because you need to know that it's possible. You need to know that I don't think about drugs and alcohol today. I'm not in the battle of that. I'm not interested in that. It has no charge for me. I was somebody who used to go through a day. I couldn't imagine a day without drugs and alcohol. And then I became somebody who couldn't imagine a day with drugs and alcohol. And you need to know that that's possible, that you can recover from addiction. First of all. Second of all, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which came out in 1939, the very first sentence of the very first foreword to the very first edition, it says, we are 100 men and women who have recovered from alcoholism. I'm paraphrasing. And the purpose of this book is to help you understand exactly how we recovered from this thing. So that idea of being recovered, somehow we've lost it in modern day recovery. I don't understand it. In modern day 12-step rooms, a lot of people still don't think you can actually recover, and that they feel that it's arrogant to say so. The next thing I do is especially in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm going to speak about food. And in particular, I'm going to speak about sugar. Why am I going to do that? Because alcohol, when we drink it, it breaks down into complex sugars in the body. So that when you give up drinking alcohol, naturally, there's going to be a blood sugar issue for every single alcoholic that has ever gotten sober. They are going to face that same thing. And if they don't know it, their diet is going to be affected by that. Their cravings are going to be affected by that. Their level of comfort is going to be affected by that. And we all know the cliche of the person in the church basement at a meeting eating donuts and all these breaded products and coffee and sugar and the whole thing. And that's unnecessary. That's an old school approach to being a person in recovery from addiction. The newer school approach is, hey, let's understand what's at play in our mind and body so that we can be more skillful as we approach this incredible thing called a healthy recovery. At the end of those meetings, when I speak, inevitably there'll be some hardcore fundamentalist person who comes up to me, like this one gentleman who came up to me this one time. And this is going to sound like I'm bashing Alcoholics Anonymous or I'm bashing 12-step programs. And I will tell you in the same breath, the 12 steps saved my life. The community of people in 12-step programs were the community of people I needed to encounter who helped to save my life at the beginning of my recovery. And not everything is perfect in the world of the 12 steps. Not everything is perfect in all those fellowships, of course, because we're all human beings and we've all got different approaches and different ideas and different levels of understanding. But that fundamentalist person will come up to me at the end of a meeting and be like, look, pal, this is Alcoholics Anonymous, okay? We don't talk about outside issues here. And I'll say, are you saying that food is an outside issue? And he's like, absolutely. This is a conversation I've actually had. Absolutely. Food is an outside issue. And I could see that he was upset and angry. And I said, look, we both want the same thing. We want to be free. We want to be healthy. We don't want to be beset by addictive cravings. And we want to help other people to achieve that same freedom. That's what we want. We may not see it exactly the same way, and that's okay, but you can approach the world and the program in the way that you do. I have no problem with it, and I'm going to approach in the way that I do, and I have found food to be an extraordinarily important thing to look at for people getting sober, especially from alcohol and drugs. And he just shook his head and just walked away. And I want to say this, in point of fact, in this one case, he also reeked like cigarettes. And so I know that this is a person who is struggling with their breath, their lungs, their health, their mind. and their body in ways that I used to when I smoked cigarettes. So it's not to put that person down or say that they're less than or more than or anything. It's like, I recognize this person is in it in a way that I am no longer in it. And I found over time that there are better ways to approach this than the ways I used to. And if I could help even one person to adopt a health and wellness perspective when you approach recovery, then it's worth my time. Because man, did I pay prices around the food that I was eating in early recovery and the cigarettes that I was smoking in early recovery, and how much that, I'm going to have to use some French here, it fucked with my mind so badly and really hurt my body a lot. And so, yeah. And not to mention keeping somebody stuck in the frequency of addiction when you're smoking and eating like that. So we want people to be free. And there's a better way, in my opinion, to do that. And that's what I'm seeing play out in our community, which you so beautifully spoke about. So those are the things that come to my mind in hearing your comment. And I'm just grateful to you for sitting in the circle today. And thank you so much.